Hi, my name's Alan Smith, and this is the fifth in a series of webcasts covering the development of experimentation using GPT algorithms to control a high-level strategy of a StarCraft II bot. In this webcast, I'll be adding functionality to the bot to gather Vespene gas and train more advanced units. So let's take a quick look at the current implementation of the Protest GPT bot. We see that this class is deriving from bot AI, and here we can see the setup code for the bot. We have an array of strings, which is going to be the build order, and also a pointer to this build order, which is build order ID. If we navigate to the onStep method, we can see that every 10 iterations, we're distributing the workers and logging the statistics. If the build order pointer is at the end of the build order, then we're going to call GPT and get the strategy. And then we can process the strategy and decide whether we're going to attack the enemy base or defend our base. We're also going to process the build order, so let's take a look at that method. The build order is an array of strings. So we're going to get the current item on the build order, and then based on its value, we're going to train the appropriate unit or build the appropriate structure. So I'm setting train unit and build structure to false, and if the build order says build probe, we'll set the unit ID to probe, we'll set the structure ID to nexus, because probes are built at a nexus, and we'll set the train unit flag to true. And we do the same with zealots, and here we set the structure ID to gateway. We've also got code to build structures, and here we set the structure ID and set the build structure flag to true. And after that, depending on the value of train unit or build structure, we can execute the appropriate function. So when I'm building a structure, we make a call to build structure. If the structure was built, we advance the build order. And also, if we can't build the structure, maybe we don't have a dependent building, we'll print out that we can't build that and we'll advance the build order. If we get any unknown build orders, or the build order was skipped for some reason, we'll increment the build order counter. So let's take a look at the code for building structures. If we can't afford the structure, we'll return build status can't afford. If the structure is a nexus, then we'll use the expand now command of bot AI, which will build a new nexus on the next expansion point. If we're building a pylon, the pylons will need to be built next to a nexus. Initially, I was setting the build position next to a random nexus, but this was causing problems with lots of congestion, which was trapping units, so I modified the code to select a position closer to the map center. And then I used the find placement method to position the pylon with a placement step of 1. And this will hopefully allow the units to move between the structures and not get trapped. For all of the other structures, we need to build them near a pylon. So I first check to see that we've got any pylons. I then select a position based on a random pylon that's 5 units towards the map center. And then use the find placement method to find a position for the structure. This time I set the placement step to 4, because the other structures are typically larger than the pylons. So let's take a look at the code for training units. First of all, we'll check if we have enough supply available. And if we don't have enough supply, but we do have a pylon that's currently building, we'll return build status queuing, which means that the bot will keep trying until that pylon is completed, and not advance the build order. Next, we're going to check if we can actually afford the unit. Again, the bot will keep trying until we can afford it, because we'll hopefully be building up more resources. The next thing we need to do is to check if we've actually got the structure that's available for building that unit. And if we don't have that structure, we're returning that that unit can't be built. If we do have a structure, we'll find a structure that's available, and here I'm checking to make sure that the structure is idle, which means it's currently not building any units. We could queue up lots of units within the structure, but I've decided to only build a unit if we do have an idle structure that can create that unit immediately. As we've already got code for building gateways, it makes sense to look at some of the other units that we can create in a gateway. So in the StarCraft wiki, I'll select the gateway that we've got in StarCraft II. We've already got code to generate zealots, but I would like to train stalkers, sentries, and adepts. And in order to create stalkers, sentries, and adepts, we need to have a cybernetics core. So in order to create these more advanced units, we'll need to harvest Vespene gas. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to create an assimilator. So I'll copy the code for a nexus, replace the unit ID with Assimilator, and I'll copy-paste Assimilator to modify the build order text. I can use Ctrl-U to change it to lowercase, and I'll capitalize the A. So now I can navigate to the Build Structures method and add the code for building an assimilator. So I'll add an else if the structure ID is unit type assimilator. And the assimilators must be built on a geyser which is producing gas. And we want to build the assimilator close to an existing nexus. So I'll iterate through the nexuses and get a list of the Vespene geysers. Copilot's helping me here, but I'll change the distance to 15 units instead of 10. And GitHub Copilot's generated some code for me here. At the top of the method, I'm already checking if we can afford the unit, so we don't need to perform that check again. So this code looks pretty good. I'm going to make a slight change. We want to select a worker that's close to the geyser position, but if we don't find one, we don't want to return can't build, because that will advance the build order. We want to wait until a worker is available, so I'll return build status queuing here. The rest of the code seems fine. We're first going to check if the geyser already has an assimilator. And if not, we'll tell a worker to build the assimilator at the position of the geyser. And if that's successful, we can return build status built. So Copilot used self units here to check for the assimilators. I'm going to change that to self structures. You've always got to be careful with the code that Copilot is generating. So in order to test this, instead of using GPT to determine the build order, I'll create a text file and name it test build. And I'll generate a splitter window, and I'll copy-paste the build commands into this text file. So I'll build a few probes, build an assimilator, 3 more probes and a assimilator, and then specify building more probes. And I want to use this test build order instead of calling out to GPT-4. So in the startup code, I'll add code to load a test build order. So we can say build order is equal to prompt utils. And Copilot's saying that we should use prompt utils.load build order. However, I can just use the load prompt text, which will load the text file into a string. I'll copy-paste the name of the file. And as the entire file will be one string, we'll split the text using carriage return, and I'll append that line to the build order of the bot. And with that done, we can run the game as usual. So let's test this and see if it builds assimilators for us. And that seemed to work fine. We've built the 2 assimilators. However, we can see that it's having problems building probes, and this is because we've reached the supply cap. So let's go into the build order file and modify it so that we're going to be building pylons. We'll need to do this when we're creating more advanced units. Now that we've got an assimilator, we'll need to build a cybernetics core before we can build those more advanced units. So I'll copy the build assimilator code, change the unit ID to cybernetics core, and change the build order string to cybernetics core. In order to build a cybernetics core, we need to have a gateway. So I'll add code to check that we have at least one gateway. And with that done, I can copy the build order string, go back to build order text, and add some instructions to build cybernetics cores. And we'll need a gateway to do this. So I'll copy build gateway, and I'll add that to the build order before we build the cybernetics cores. So let's test this. We don't need to do any special coding for the position of the cybernetics core, so this should just work. You can see that we've built our assimilators and a couple of pylons. And here we've built our gateway. And here we've got the first cybernetics core. So that code seems to be working fine. So now we can focus on building those more advanced units. So let's build some stalkers. I'll copy the code for build zealot, modify the unit ID and the build order string. We also need to check that we've got at least one cybernetics core available, and if we don't, then the build order will be skipped. So I'll copy build stalker, and I'll paste it several times into the build list. And I'll also add some pylons so we don't run out of supply cap. So let's test this. And here we can see that build stalker was unknown or skipped. It is actually being skipped. And the reason is that we've started building a cybernetics core, but it hasn't completed yet. It's still currently building. So I'll drop back to the build order, and we'll build a few probes after we've built the cybernetics core, which will hopefully give it time to complete before we start building the stalkers. And let's test this and see if it works any better. So I'll select the gateway so we can see when it's creating units. And we can see that it's creating the first stalker. And here comes another one. And here we can see that it's successfully creating stalkers. So that seemed to work fine. I'll copy build stalker and paste it twice. I'll modify the first one to build sentries and the second one to build adepts. And we can drop down to the build order, and I'll modify that so that we're going to be building stalkers, sentries and adepts. So let's test this. Okay, so it's looking like I've got my indentation wrong. Let's fix that and test again. Okay, so we've got 3 stalkers. And here we can see that we're building the sentries and adepts. So that seems to work fine. I'll pause the recording and add some code for building other advanced structures and units. So I've added code to build stargates and robotics factories. And once we have a stargate, we can build phoenixes, oracles and void rays. So I've added code for those. And with a robotics factory, we can build immortals. And you can see in the build order that I've added commands for building these additional advanced units and structures. And I'm also building quite a few pylons to make sure that we don't hit the resource cap. So let's test this and see if the implementations work. Okay, so we've got the gateway and the cybernetics core. And here we can see that we've started building a stargate and a robotics factory. And if I select the stargate, we can see that it's training those more advanced units. And the same thing with the robotics factory. And it's looking like we've got quite a good army consisting of a mixture of units. So I haven't added all of the units that we can build with Protoss, and I haven't focused on doing any upgrades yet. But with these more advanced units, we can modify the prompt that I'm using for GPT-4, and hopefully the strategy suggestions will allow us to beat the game on more advanced levels. And we'll be looking at that in the next webcast.